Great. You good? Okay, I'm not logged in yet, but I'll get there. Okay, we will call this meeting to order. This is the committee of the whole agenda for December 14th. And I would like to recognize that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Lillooet people. Could I have someone please move the agenda? Moved by Director Stoner, seconded by Director Mack. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. 4.1 CAO verbal update. Nothing today? Nothing. Okay, no problem. 4.2 information report regarding the engagement framework. And we have Ms. Westerholm. Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Tricia Westerholm, Communications and Engagement Manager with the SLRD. And in your agenda package, you have an informational report with the SLRD's hot off the press engagement framework. And I'm not planning to walk page by page through the framework itself today, but we do have a bit of a presentation to just speak to some of the context around how we got here and what this will mean for the SLRD as we move forward with public engagement in the future. Next slide, please. So just in speaking to a little bit of that point around how we got here, the board had initially directed staff to develop a communications and engagement strategy quite a long time ago. And when we looked at that work, we decided to separate them out into two distinct bigger projects. Just recognizing that while they're often used interchangeably and they go together hand in glove, communications and engagement are two separate functions and need each other independently from each other. So we presented to the board a communication strategy in March of this year, that's really a toolkit for staff to use in our engagement planning, or sorry, communications planning process. And we've sort of been working on the engagement framework for some time, concurrently with that. And we've also done staff training on principles of engagement, and the board and some of our elected officials from our member municipalities have also done some training over the last couple of years. So lots of things have been going on. We've developed a policy that was coming yesterday originally to the board, but will come later today with the continuation of the board meeting. And then this framework is the big piece, and a toolkit as well. So lots of research in this project and development, and now moving into implementing, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. So when we talk about engagement and why it's important, there's a few bullets on this slide. We could talk about this a lot. To keep it simple and high level, we know that effective public engagement leads to more informed decision making and builds trust with the public. That's really our goal. The next slide, please. And then building on that a bit more, why is the framework important? So I just mentioned the policy that will come to the board later today when you resume your regular council meeting. And that's really our foundational piece that directs our work, and also I think is really important both internally and externally to affirm the SLRD's commitment to public engagement and to acknowledge that we recognize and appreciate the value of engagement. So then the framework, we will ultimately have a policy in place. The framework will support that policy, and then the toolkit is the application piece that staff will use in engagement planning moving forward to guide them through the process for that. And that's in the package with the framework as well. Next slide, please. So in building this framework and our policy that you'll see later, the SLRD has adopted the principles of the International Association for Public Participation in our approach to engagement. It's an international association that is dedicated to advancing the practice of public participation or engagement, and has really become the gold standard for government, especially in principles around public engagement. And it's the foundation that all of our member municipalities follow as well. And many governments throughout BC, Canada, and abroad, and in particular regional districts are really framework guidelines and engagement frameworks and guidelines and principles of IAP2 as well. Next slide, please. When we talk about IAP2, and it's part of the program, this spectrum on the screen, the IAP2 spectrum of public participation, is really the crux of it. And this is sort of what we build everything else around. So you can see there's 5 phases of engagement. And we look at those as we're applying them to a project or a decision by looking at the increasing impact of that decision, what the public participation goal is, and what our promise to the public is. And so this is where we kind of get into a little bit more around the difference between communications and engagement and the need to separate them out, because while we will always have communication around a project, there's not always the need or requirement, or sometimes even it's not appropriate to engage. So when we look at the first column of inform, that's sort of where the communication piece initially comes into. So regardless of a scope of a project or the impact of the decision, we will always inform the community, and that's really around the communication piece there. And then a project could land in numerous, many of these columns as it works through its life cycle. It might start and stop at the inform stage if that's really all we're doing is communicating with the public, but then it might move through these other phases as well. And in the framework and toolkit, we've identified for each of these columns some of the activities that we would consider in our engagement planning process to identify how we would, depending on where the project lands, which sort of engagement activities we would do to support that project. Next slide, please. This slide is just a couple of images of internal guides that we've put together. They're part of the framework and the toolkit to remind staff when they're building their engagement plans, the 5 sort of stages of engagement planning process. And then the second image is just to walk people through when they have that project and they're looking at engagement, do we need to engage the public on this? So the first question we ask is there a legal or statutory requirement for consultation? And just want to say here that this doesn't mean, if the answer to that is no, that doesn't mean it stops there. We could still actively engage. And we've actually baked into the engagement framework itself a statement around that minimum requirements should be exceeded wherever possible, because we really want to get out of that mindset of this is a box to check and we've done, we put the ad in the paper and that's it, full stop. We don't need to do anything else. We don't want to be thinking that way when we think about engagement. So really encouraging people to expand how we think about what we can do for engagement. So when we answer that question, if the answer to that question is that there is a legal requirement, obviously we would build our plan around that, and that would be our starting point. But again, we're not factor. And if the answer to that is no, we would dig a little deeper and ask if there will be, if the decision will affect people or a stakeholder group in any way. And then with that question, if the answer is no, we don't have to engage the public. But again, we would, depending on the project, the level of impact, the scope, we would determine whether we want to engage and what, and the board's direction, what our engagement might look like. If the answer to that is that, yes, there will be an impact, we're going to go to the next level and we're going to let people still ask some more questions to just guide us through this process. So ultimately, we're just looking through what is the level of impact that we're dealing with and whether or not it's appropriate to engage the public, or if we're just looking to go back to that first stage of informing, which we will always do. And when we get to the very end, if we've got to all these questions and we're coming out at yes, then we start planning and we build an engagement plan and take all of these things into consideration. And we would use the framework and the toolkit to guide that process. Next slide, please, Raylan. When we talk about the goals of public engagement, well, the framework, the policy, the toolkit are all informed by or built around the principles of IAP2. They're also informed by some survey results that we did, surveys late last summer, both public and internal surveys and staff who are involved in engagement, to really establish our goals for engagement. And so this information came directly from that survey. So the goals are to increase opportunities for community engagement, increase citizen engagement and knowledge of the public process, identify and support opportunities for engagement to enlighten and inform public decisions, build the regional district's reputation as a trusted organization, increase participation in engagement opportunities, and provide opportunities for the public to provide feedback wherever possible. Next slide, please. When we go back to the survey results, again, it was really clear from our internal surveys that the SLRD is an organization, both the board and staff believes that community engagement is an important part of the work that we do as a regional district, and that will support the regional relations and decisions that affect them. Next slide, please. And when we heard from the public, it was really clear in our survey results that we have a lot of opportunity to improve our work in this space, that the public did not feel necessarily that they were not satisfied with the level of engagement opportunities that we were offering. They didn't feel like they had a lot of communication around opportunities when they were available, and that there were not necessarily creative opportunities to engage on in SLRD decisions. Next slide, please. So actually, I can dig a little bit more into the survey results. We can stay on the slide, but some of the we asked a lot of questions to kind of gauge where people felt we were at, how they felt about our current engagement activities, some of the barriers that they found to engagement, and some suggestions for how to improve things. And we asked some questions, asked them to indicate their level of satisfaction or agreement, with 4 or 5 different statements. So we asked them, presented a statement, and then asked them to say if they agreed, strongly agreed, or neutral, disagreed, or strongly disagreed with those statements. And overwhelmingly with all of the statements, they either, not overwhelmingly, the majorities disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statements. And the statements were around things like level of satisfaction with the level of influence and involvement provided by the SLRD, how the SLRD communicates our processes for decision-making and the opportunities available, whether or not the SLRD adequately considers the community's feedback when making decisions, if we listen to citizens and stakeholders and welcome involvement, and if we provide creative opportunities for engagement. So 58% of respondents that they either strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed with the statement, I am satisfied with the level of influence and involvement the SLRD provides the community on projects of interest to me. 58.3% of respondents also strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed with the statement the SLRD clearly communicates the process it will use to make the decision. 55.56% of respondents indicated that they either strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed with the statement the SLRD adequately considers the community's feedback when making decisions. 61.12% of respondents stated that they strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed with the statement that the SLRD clearly communicates what aspects of a project can and can't be influenced by community input. 47.22% of respondents said they either strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed with the statement that the SLRD listens to its citizens and stakeholders and welcomes their involvement. And 63.89% of respondents said they either strongly disagreed or disagreed with the statement the SLRD provides unique and creative methods for community engagement. I would pause for a moment on that one and say that I think if we did the survey this year, we would actually see that we had moved the dial a little bit on that, because in this 2023 calendar year, and since the survey was done, we've already implemented a number of tools that we haven't used before in engagement. We've implemented our online engagement platform. We have the newsletter that goes out now that draws attention to those opportunities. And we've done some really great work in community with pop-up events, and just other things that we haven't done in the past. So it would be, I am speculating here, but I'd like to think that we're at least, we're putting the tools in place and doing the work to move that dial. So that's great, great work that's happening there. So when we look at the survey and we know that from the public's perspective, there's a strong desire to be involved. That was the feedback we had in the survey as well, that they were looking for opportunities to be involved in the decision-making process, and there's a real lack of awareness. So also looking for more communication around those opportunities when they are available, and even when the opportunities aren't available, but more information around how the SLRD comes to its decision on things.
Do you mind taking questions?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, when we did that survey, who did it go out to?
So it went out to the broader, there was a public survey that went to the broader community that we promoted through social media and the website, and believe Peak News Magazine also shared a news article that the survey was happening. And then the internal survey was to staff and the board.
Is it broken down at all by region and
We asked people to indicate in the public survey where they were, which part of the region they were in, for the 4 electoral areas and the municipalities as well. And it wasn't a required comment field, so not everyone selected that. But going back to the results, the majority of respondents were from the electoral areas. And I believe it was electoral area A and electoral area C that had the strongest response level. But it wasn't significant. There wasn't a significant shift between the communities. We did have a lot of support on social media sharing from community organizations like the Bridge River Valley Community Association, and which would influence some of those participatory results as well.
okay, thank you.
And we've got a good benchmark now for moving forward, because we would like, ideally, we would do this work again, the survey, to continue to gauge sentiment, to measure if we are moving the dial on some of these feedbacks.
We do have a question from Director Birch Jones, who's on the screen.
Good morning, and apologies for being late. Thank you, Patricia. This is really important work. And I think, well, you can use the Lillooet landfill as a test case, because there's just massive misunderstanding from the public around what's happening with the landfill, but there's a lot of interest and chatter. So yeah, why not use that one as a starter? Move the bar on that one. Thanks. This is really great work, and I'm happy I participated in some of it and did this, encouraged the survey, and sorry for the background noise here. Cheers.
Thanks. When we asked the public how they'd like to be involved in public engagement, the options ranged from everything from not wanting to be involved at all to that the community should have the final say on decisions. Most respondents, 25.71%, said they wanted to be informed about the topic. And 22.8% said they wanted the SLRD to listen to their concerns and advise on how their input was used in the decision. 20% said the community should have final decision-making in some topics, on some topics. 14% said they wanted to be involved with finding solutions and analyzing alternatives for a project or a decision. And 11% said they wanted to collaborate with the SLRD on all aspects of decisions, including the development of alternatives, and the remainder were neutral on that question.
Sorry, Patricia, I also have a question on the screen from Sal, if you don't mind. Director Demare?
Yeah, it's not, well, I've got several things on this. First is our official community plan update project has been using this program. It's phenomenal. And, we've had pop-ups, we've had all kinds of various surveys, and moving forward in the next process, we the community is going to get 3 more times for input. We're going to have a public information session, a public open house, a survey, and again at the public hearing once we get to that point. So it's actually been really, really good through that process. We've had the delay, but between Alex McKay and Brenda Collenbrender, they've done a phenomenal job. Prior to the wildfire, I was back and forth with Omar on when we have a water service disruption and so on and so forth, about using that alert system and creating a polygon, the Safer Goldbridge water, and using that alert system to notify the people. Because once they do, they can either get it on their cell phone, their landline, or on email. So all the various methods of getting it, other than just sharing it on social media, which a lot of people may not use. So during the wildfire, of course, we had the alerts and the orders, and that's the method that was used. One of the methods was that alert system. So just looking forward, because this process here that you're mentioning is really mainly about projects and having all the various systems in place for a project. But if we look at overall our communications program, I mean, it's more than just projects. Very similar to what Vivian just mentioned, you know, to take a look at the financial. You know, we've never had a program where we communicate out to the public to get input on our budgets. So I think as an organization, we got to look at our whole communication program. Yes, this is really good, and I'm delighted to see this program for projects, but we got to communicate more for all the other everything else that goes on, and especially in our electoral areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Excuse me. Next slide, please. We did ask the public to identify barriers to engagement when we have opportunities available, and locations, and just that lack of awareness when there are opportunities were the two that came up predominantly. So either if the opportunities were not accessible for location, or they just weren't aware. So definitely some work that we can do there to improve that. Next slide, please, Rayleigh. So excuse me again, when we look at compiling all of this information that we know, we know obviously that the public wants to have opportunities to participate and provide input. The SLRD wants to encourage and facilitate that work, and there's lots of room to improve. So we're looking at the opportunities to provide more opportunities for engagement. And that's where some of our tools come into place as well. We've used our online engagement platform this year for that OCP project that Director Demare referenced. For the Lillooet landfill project, we're using it right now as our wildfire recovery site, because it provides a bit more flexibility in how we present information visually as well. And there's tools built into that site with surveys, the option to open up to questions from the public. We can have forums on that site where members of the public can comment, and we can address comments there, and the public can communicate on even public comments around that. So it's a sort of multi-level way to communicate with the community to community communication, and then SLRD to community communication as well, and community to us. So we've had that site platform launched for about a year, and each project that we do gets a little bit more involved, and it's something that we look at the tools again for each project, and which ones are most applicable and relevant. But there's lots of opportunity there as well, and then that leads into the next point of finding creative solutions or opportunities for engagement. And that really comes down to knowing what the community wants around that, what their needs are, and meeting them where they're at. And moving away from that sort of a cookie cutter approach and one, one fit for all. So there's lots of room for improvement. Next slide, please. So these are just our next steps. So we've shared the framework with the board. We'll be sharing the framework and toolkit with staff. And then we're in the new year going to organize a bit of a lunch and learn session to really hit some of the high level points around engagement and why engagement is important and how we want to be approaching engagement in the future. And then also a walkthrough of the framework with staff so that they know how to apply that to the work that they're doing and the toolkit. The toolkit that we've developed that's in the package is really high level at this point. Things are evolving and there's always lots of new tools and new ways of doing things. So we'll continue to look at that and add, that's really about providing a template guidance to staff as they're developing an engagement plan. So ideally, when we're doing this work in the future, we would have a process where at that very first sort of the initial planning phase, we would have the sort of departmental project manager, if you will, for lack of a better term, meet with the communications and engagement team, and we can walk them through this process and help them build the a communications and engagement plan for their project, and then also help implement as needed. So we are, the communications and engagement department is really the keeper of all this information. The framework will be updated as well as needed moving forward, and just making sure that staff are aware of all of this and have the tools that they need to implement and to follow those guidelines for engagement moving forward. Next slide, please. I think that's it. Does anyone have any other questions?
Go ahead.
So I really appreciate this work, and I think that we do need it, especially in light of, our community engagement that's just happened in Lillooet. But I feel that on the surveys themselves, they should always end with a comments section so that anything that's not on that survey that people want to talk about is they have that, moment to have their voice heard. And I also think that instead of just asking what services do people want, I think that should have a dollar value and the high end of the dollar value, because that's what we budget for, is the high end of the dollar value on that, so that people can make, better choices for themselves and their community. So if they want things like more hours or days that it's open, or a free store, or recycling, that there's that high end of a dollar value, because maybe they won't want that if they know that there's gonna, be that. So if we're gonna engage a community, I think we have to engage a community with all the information. But again, I really appreciate this work, and I think that we'll get there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just building on Director Hopful's comments a little bit, I'm wondering if we do have any sense yet of what people are willing to pay for this extra level of communication. And part of the context, it's a bit of a discussion we were having at the governance committee in terms of public expectation for the board and directors. And I'm thinking municipally, I really like in-person engagement and those discussions and being there, but within the sort of what our role, how that's currently conceived in the compensation and travel budgets and all that, it's not really feasible. And so is there an expectation that we find a way to, have more directors at engagements and some of these things, or even, are people fine with surveys, or they really want in-person discussions and the funding to go along with that? And might we see that in the budget?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We haven't incorporated that into the framework or the policy per se, but we've referenced the need to, as part of the planning process, to include communications and engagement budgets as line items in a project plan or a recommendation to the board, excuse me, that sort of thing. So we want to get staff in the mindset of factoring that into their budget plan for a project, so that they're accommodating for that, because there are often costs, even with just communications with advertising at the bare minimum, right? There's a cost to that. So we often don't factor that in to our plans internally. So we haven't asked the public what their comfort level would be with that kind of investment, but certainly something that we'll be considering as part of our planning process internally. And we've implemented a tool. There is a cost to the online engagement platform, for example, Banging Table, which I didn't note in the presentation, but it is the same platform that all of the member municipalities use as well for their online engagement. So it was really important for us to, well, they're reputable, it's met all of our needs. And it's kind of seamless with the other communities. So it's very recognizable and people have familiarity with it and know how to use it. So that's, so far that's been the one sort of, you know, a larger cost for us to implement, but it's also really good return on investment and good value because of the reach and the impact and all the tools that it can provide. So it's a pretty good one-stop shop. So that's been our only real cost for engagement to date.
Thank you through the chair. Really appreciate this presentation, all the work that's gone into the engagement framework and the toolkit. We'll talk about the policy later today, but I think that this is really robust work. I really, really appreciate the guiding principles for public engagement. I think that they're strong and they're robust and they really speak to some of the conversations we've had in the past. I want to speak about, and building on Director Pettingill's question around level of expectation and capacity. Like the survey results are a little bit interesting in that 20% feel like they should be empowered on at least some topics. And another 25% feel like they should be involved or collaborated with. And that's a really high level expectation of engagement. Like the cost, the time, the capacity to do that is huge. I'm not saying that it's not something that we shouldn't be striving for. But I think going back to this balancing act of like being really clear about the implications of that and appreciate this is, I think, outlined, or at least the initial steps in the policy in terms of really trying to get staff to build that into their budgets, but it doesn't come without cost. And so it's, I think one thing that will be helpful in the public engagement framework is that it starts by setting out that plan and that clear expectation of level of engagement for each project. And some of those might fall at the involved level. And that might be one of our biggest challenges is actually just communicating which projects fall at that involved level. Like the reality is that we have a lot of things that we statutorily have to do. That even our ability around this table is pretty limited to make that decision. And so I just wonder if there's an opportunity to clarify that in the engagement framework by either providing some examples of where we're statutorily required or where that informed level is probably like a large percentage of actually where our work falls. Just to help set that expectation around this table with our community and with staff about where that level of engagement is most likely going to happen. Because I think that's the one fear that I have reading through this. It's super robust. I think it's where we want to be. But if I think about the actual operational side of it and the implementation, it's a little bit terrifying.
That's a super good point.
Yeah, it's really good to do that.
Got it. Oh, wait, Mike, I've got Tony, I've got speakers.
I'm done, so I have more of a comment.
No, it's fine. That's a good. Go ahead.
A number of comments. But first of all, Patricia, I think this is fantastic. Really think you've done a super job with this, and I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. I like the fact that we're coming out and saying we are committed to public engagement. I think it's important that we say that and that not just say it, but then demonstrate to the public how we're going to implement that. And I think this gives us a plan to do that. Building trust is one of the things that we'll do, and we don't have that at the moment. In my view, based on my interactions in Area D, I obviously can't speak for the other areas, but we are not a trusted organization. We have some good relationships with some staff members that are actually on site in the area, working there, people that they've got to know. So I think there's some trust in staff and in work that's actually being done on the ground. But as a group sitting around this table, we are not trusted, and we're not appreciated. part of that, I know it might be, maybe you don't want to hear that, but you know, the only contact, the only voice that area residents have is through their area director. They don't know the municipal directors, and they have no opportunity to engage with them, or very little opportunity to engage with them. And they see you as meddling with events that they don't want you to meddle with. Now, this is not my view. It's not what I'm saying about our organisation, our way of doing business. I'm just saying that that's the kind of thing, the kind of comment that I get to deal with. I often have to say to people, yeah, that person, yeah, they're a councillor in a particular area, but when they sit at the table here, that they are really interested in and committed to having a regional perspective. I'm forever making that sort of defence, and I shouldn't have to, because the way that the board operates, it should be in a way that people get to see that happening. And I know you could say, well, they could tune in and listen to this meeting. Put it over to them. Just make sure that you watch board meetings, and a lot of people do now. So we by putting our meetings online, that's been a really positive thing for us, because a lot of people get to see the debate, get to hear what we have to say. But I think we've obviously got to go beyond that. And what's at the root of this is that people they see the area director as somebody, if they don't like what's going on, they can kick them out at the next election. Whether they do or not, it's another matter, but they know they can. They can't have any impact, any effect at all on who from a municipality sits at this table. I'm not really clear whether the municipal directors represent the view of the council that they are part of. No, they don't. Okay, so you know that doesn't inspire trust either. They see you as people with no accountability to anybody. You're not accountable to the voters in the the rural areas. You're not accountable to your own council. And most of the people in your town have no idea what the SLRD is anyway. So that's one of the regional districts are clumsy organizations, and that's one of the reasons. And so if we look at this and really genuinely implement this and find ways to put municipal directors in the electoral areas, which is where 90% of our work is done, and meeting with people and involving them and allowing them some say in decisions at certain times. If we can do that, then I think we can improve the way that we do business. I think we can increase the amount of satisfaction in the rural areas, and I think we can build trust. So, as I say, I'm not trying to jump on or criticize individuals here or anything. I'm trying to reflect feelings and sentiments that I hear in my area. Thank you.
Okay. It's unfortunate to hear, and it's not the first time you've said it, and it's not the first time we've heard it from other area directors, and I think that it's hard to rebut because people feel the way they feel and say what they're feeling at that moment in time, and then that becomes the sentiment that is carried to this table, and that creates a challenging environment for us to work together as a board. And
can I just and the reason I'm saying it again now is that I look at this plan that is laid out here and the tools that we have, that we're developing, and I see that as a way of improving the situation, of just changing that feeling that people have about this. I see it was a really good move.
Yeah, just on that, and I think it goes back to my initial comments of balancing that with expectation and capacity and cost. As Director Pettingill mentioned, we don't have typical travel budget to show up. I know that many of us in Squamish do try and go to the public hearings when they happen in Area D, and we do try and participate, but there is limited budget to do that. And so the reality that in order to increase that comes with dollars. And what we typically hear at budget time is increasing dollars and budget capacity is the last thing that folks want. And so that's the balancing act. I think that's around the table. And I agree that the tools that are within this engagement framework will help set those levels of expectation for engagement and consultation and enable us to understand where we do need to put more money in the budget in order to really push that beyond just a level of inform for really critical projects.
I'm going to go back to my speakers list. Director Richmond, go ahead.
Or start a couple things. I mean, I like to think that the way we all approach the work is a regional approach. I like to think that the way we debate and discuss and the decisions we make from a municipal standpoint, it's fairly obvious, at least to the board, that we're taking a municipal approach, and I certainly am not here just to represent Pemberton. I'm a director on the regional district, and I'm hopeful that in your interactions with your residents that EADs relay that information to their residents so that they recognize that we're not here just, I wanted to build on Jenna's comments because I think you said it really well. And I wasn't going to ask this question because I've been sort of struggling with it when I read the report and listening to Patty, and I apologize for being late. Great report. You know, the criteria is out there for the spectrum, how we move through the spectrum. Ask this question, move along the spectrum. You said staff will be sort of trained on with the toolkit and it'll help them move through that. And this is the reason I didn't ask this question, wasn't going to ask this question because it's not very clear. I'm not sure exactly how we still decide where on that spectrum we fall for a few reasons. Number one, what Jenna said about capacity. Two, expectations, whether they're reasonable. Three, the understanding of the process. We get involved in a process. We do hours of reports, reading, listening to our experts, et cetera, debating. What is the expectation from the residents who understandably are not going to spend that same amount of time on a topic to be involved in the actual decision making? When I saw the results of how many people wanted to have a final say or look for those alternatives, I'm like, oh, that's a big expectation. That's tough. That's what we're hired to do. And we all agree. I agree on all the statements made about the importance of this work, and we all want to up our game here at the SLRD. In terms of our engagement, I think that's, you do a great job, and I think you want to up your game as well. So that's our goal, but the expectations scare me a little bit. So I'm wondering how staff applies the criteria or how we, the board, apply the criteria to make that decision to what level on the spectrum to go and whether that meets people's expectations. So again, really not a very clear question. It's more something I'm just sort of struggling with.
No, there's a few things there to unpack for sure. I think we've talked internally about building that into our reports to the board so that we're identifying when we're talking about a project, where does this fall, or a decision that needs to be made on that spectrum. And I think there's a huge opportunity at that inform stage to really, that's where the awareness comes in, and to really set those expectations around, what the decision-making process is, what it looks like, and why it is where it is on that, and some of those things around capacity and resources and legal requirements and statutory requirements. That's where that could be built into that, to the communications piece around it, to inform folks around, why this decision is made at this level, and maybe there's not the opportunity for empower with this one because of these reasons. And there we can work on building out that toolkit and in the internal training a bit more as well around what, when we talk about empower, in the survey results. Of course, lots of people will say, yep, that's what they want to have a say in every single decision that comes before the board. But really, we can define that a bit more. The empower piece is really around an election or a referendum or an alternative approval process. Like those are really limited things. We have lots of opportunity at the involve, where it's a bit more surveys and maybe an open house. And so we can manage that, I think, in the communication piece around it. And it also really set that tone internally as well, so that.
You just made me think when you're talking, one of the things that I'm not telling you, and you don't know what I found over the years is often when people get engaged, it's much later in the process. And so that importance of that first stage, so that people are along for if they want to be engaged in this process, whatever the spectrum, wherever we're going on the spectrum with this particular item, they want to be on the ride, they're on the ride the whole time. So as information is presented, as debate happens and conversation happens and it goes back, they hear that. So again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but that first step to get people listening right off, as opposed to coming in on the 11th hour and going, hey, what about this? And then having to sort of back up on the process. Because another thing that we get critiqued on is how long things take to happen. So if we want to keep things moving, this is part of it too.
And that's part of that informed piece too. And we've also, factored in and really tried to highlight the reporting back piece. So, when we have engagement, it's also not just reporting back to the board, but also reporting back to those participants in how their information was or was not used in the process. And also setting that expectation really early on as well, when we're inviting people to provide input or to be a part of the process. Really setting that stage early on in the process so that they know what to expect and what that's going to look like and how their information will be used.
Thank you. I have Director Mack, then Director Hopful, then Director Herford on the screen. Go ahead, Director Mack.
Yeah, I have to agree with Tony. I spend a lot of time defending us, the regional district, with my constituents, because not the majority, but an awful lot of them, they don't have a clue what we do here. And they're very negative about our existence or whatever. But I mean, there are some that are very positive because they've worked with us, whatever. So I think it's extremely important to get that positive communication out there as to what we do and the group and how we work together and all that kind of stuff. Because people out there, for whatever reason, they don't pay attention unless it actually affects them. So I think it's really important to get a positive spin out there so that they know, if they need to ask a question, who to come and ask and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a lot of the communication part of it. I don't think we've been very good at that over the years. We're moving towards that, and that's a good thing because I think that will really help our position.
Thank you.
And I think too, with talking about costs of communication and engagement, I think we as directors can all put that out there too. We can alleviate some of those costs that the SLRD may or may not have by putting it on our Facebook, making it known in meetings what we're doing. Oh, I do that, but how many people does it reach? Maybe just the people in the room. Maybe we can do better at that with our newspapers and all that. And the other thing I just want to say is when we talk about expectations, I think if we're using Lillooet's survey for an example, the expectation that came out in that meeting was that it didn't really matter what Lillooet thought. It didn't really matter how much engagement they had because the vote was already in. It was 2/3, right? So we had already agreed to up that price. Area A and B had agreed to up that price. That's 2 out of 3 wins. It didn't matter what Lillooet thought. And I think that was really taken in a very harsh way. That was actually said at the meeting. Why are we voting on this? Doesn't matter. We don't count. we're the majority of the taxpayers, but we don't count. So I think that we have to do better that way too. I mean, if we're gonna make those, it has to be, I don't know, just a little bit better done.
Okay. Director Herford, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I think this is like nearly foundational to what we do. And I'm curious around some good discussion around the, costs and choosing the appropriate level of engagement. But how about engaging on this on the IAP2 itself? And just to speak, give you some context. What I mean is, I've dealt with we use the IAP2 process, the District of Squamish, and I'm very happy with with how it works and how it's articulated clearly to the reader of the report as to what level we're looking for a project and so on. But where I've run into challenges in the past has been where there's a public engagement with a process that is set at the consult level, but has collaborate level expectations for the outcome. So has there been thought into how we highlight that sort of that set, what level we've selected and why, so that we have sort of realistic expectations, the community can have realistic expectations of how their input will be reflected in the outcomes?
We can certainly build that into our internal engagement plan templates to make sure that we're thinking about that, so that we're not just identifying where it falls on the spectrum, but setting those expectations really early on. And
yeah. Okay, thank you. I think it's really important. It's a great tool for us, but it is quite, can be considered quite technical. And then when someone, the public sets out to engage with the whatever the initiative is, we need to make sure that everyone understands where it falls on the scale, so that so they can engage, they can have that on board as they invest their time and energy in engaging with the project. And on the cost piece, I wondered, as I'm beginning to understand more and more about our budgeting process and the cost centers, it is the engagement work build against the cost center for each project, or when would it come from sort of overall governance, and what's appropriate there? Because sometimes the folks that we would like to engage with are actually quite a small set of the overall. And just has there been any thought about that yet, or where does that sit currently, I guess, is the other part of that question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The tools like the online engagement platform, for example, they're budgeted for under general government as a service to the entire organization. So similar to like the website, for example, as a tool. But I think Nikki can probably speak to this in a bit more detail, but I would think the projects probably would come out of a cost center specific to that project.
I would assume that as part of the whole package for a project, it would just be one of those elements that's incorporated into it. So I think consideration of distance, staffing expenses, that needs to be built into the budget as to how much and where staff are going. Is it in person? Is it more virtual opportunities, more survey based? And I think it needs to be considered the size of the project as to that level and the budget that's going to be in there. And unfortunately, the cost is the cost. And so there might be the same amount, say for one project that's happening in a sort of a larger area that maybe has more funds towards the service. But I think we have to look at it as far as engagement and getting that feedback. And I don't think typically engagement has been like a break the bank type of cost to it.
Yeah, thank you. I just I think that it's probably appropriate. It'd probably be appropriate to do both, sort of that costing to be shared broadly over the organization, because it does go to the overall well-being of our decision-making process as a body and so on. But I think in some cases it may be appropriate to look at incorporating public engagement into the specific project costs. So to reflect the expectations of that specific community, and if that's the expectation, we can meet that expectation, but that comes from that needs to be accounted for in a higher project cost. Just given some, and it can kind of be in both, maybe a little bit of both, but just so that we can actually meet the stand a chance of meeting the expectations of the folks in each that are affected by each project. So I just want to sort of float that concept, and I'm curious to see as this goes forward where we end up landing there.
Thanks. Do you want to respond to that comment? I do have a speaker's list, but
If I may, just
Yeah.
pick up on it. I was listening to, as I was listening to I was thinking of a case study, if you like, one that we're engaged in at the moment. Black Tusk Village is approaching us about taking the wastewater treatment, the whole water system. So staff are involved with them. I'm involved with the Strata Council. We are going to have a meeting with the whole community. And at that point, I would love to have other directors there to join me and to listen directly, rather than have to wait until it comes to the board and then it's just my view that you're hearing. So, and I could see it's a minimal cost, not a huge amount that would be needed, but that could be built into the administration part of that we're going to charge Black Tusk. They're going to be paying for the administration, and that would be included in that. So if we use that approach, I think that would cover some of the issue that Director Stone is raising. Yeah, thank you.
thank you. I have Director Pettengill, Director Demare, Director Crompton, and then I have comments. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to clarify for anyone that's watching, as municipal directors, we are accountable to the people that elected our council, and our council, we are appointed annually, so we don't sort of get to hold this position regardless of how we perform. The Squamish Council does not review the SLRD agenda because it's not available in time, and they don't tell us how to vote on every issue. But sort of annually decide this group of people is best able to contribute to the board, and this is who we'd like to sit. And if we're not doing a good job, we won't be sitting after that. And we do have a practice of reporting back to council and the community what's going on, and we can hear from council at that time. Our staff may put in referrals and so on. So there's a lot of back and forth communication and accountability. The whole RD system is like a award system, which we don't seem to do in BC, but in other jurisdictions, it's very common. You vote for the representative for your area and you bring that to a larger body, and that's how it works. I think if people in the regional district don't like that sort of system, that's something we could bring to the province. That's not within our control. And maybe that is a discussion to have. Just one other reflection is on the expectations piece. I think in a municipality, you're living much closer together. There's a lot more opportunity and possibility for collaboration and compromise and necessity too. And so it happens a lot. And I think for some people, they move to a rural area because you don't have to do that. You don't want that. And so I think that's another thing we're bumping up against. On the one hand, there's people who sort of want a lot more of, I want to do my own thing. As a board, I think we are really good at working together. We have an RGS, which I think is quite strong. And so we're actually trying to align and almost in some ways working the other direction, trying to pull everyone in the same direction, which I think is the better way to go. But that's not what people are always expecting. And I think there's some friction there too, which we'll bump up with this engagement.
Thank you. Director Demare?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few things. At the onset of our OCP, just on the cost comments that were made, I actually asked, where's the money going to come from? Would you like me to fund it? the OCP process. And you know, I was talking about maybe an external contractor to do it, and staff decided that they would like to do it, and the funding would come from general government. So everything for the area OCP update is coming from general government. Just want to share that with you. The other one that I've got is our newsletters. And I've asked before for insights on our social media and also insights on our newsletter. I think we need to know what % of the public is actually looking at the newsletter, and what content are they specifically looking at, because you know, we give them links to everything. So knowing that would, you know, help all of us know what's happening and where can we improve and what do we need to share more of, etc. I also subscribe to the newsletters that Thompson Regional District does, and they actually share in between their monthly report some positive things that happen in their area. So if there's a project that was completed up by Green Lake or wherever it is in their electoral areas, they share that positive news. So just some feedback on, not really pertaining to this presentation, but to overall communications. Because to build that trust, you have to have everything. You have to have all those various communication systems in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Crompton, go ahead.
Thanks for this report. I love that we're receiving a report on communications and that it is so clear and useful. That I don't know why I get so much pleasure from that, but I just think it's incredibly readable. It was extremely well presented, and I am a huge fan of simplicity. And I think it's not an easy thing to make something that's relatively complicated simple, and you've done a terrific job of that. I read the word "we" a lot in there. We communicate, we present, we do a number of things. And I'm wondering if you have a sense for who the community believes we are. Do they think we is the board? Do they believe we is SLRD staff? Do they have a sense for who they think we is? And who are we referring to when we say we?
It's a really good question. When I use the term "we" in our documents, I'm referring to collective as the board and staff, as an organization. I'm not sure if that's right or wrong, but that's definitely my approach. I think from the community, that's a bit of a loaded question. Well, it's not a loaded question, but it's a really, it kind of depends. I think in electoral areas where there's maybe a lot of interaction with the electoral area director, because that is the community's voice at the table and the representation, they would probably see the SLRD as that person and as the board then by extension. But I think also we have communities where some staff members in particular are very involved in the work that they do in the community. If we look at the electoral areas again, so and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but so there are community members in an electoral area that would identify specifically with some staff, because just the fact that that's the person they see on the ground in the community, so would identify those folks as the SLRD. So it's a really interesting question. it's not something we've asked, to my knowledge, so it would be a really interesting thing to get some feedback on, actually, at some point, to ask people. And I think, you know, what I'm sort of taking a lot of notes on, and separate but tied to the engagement piece on the communications front again, is this a real need to have some sort of a, you know, an SLRD 101 public education type communications plan that really starts at the ground level and helps to tick off some of these things that we could do to build some of that awareness, and get a sense of what the community does know, what they don't know, what they would like to know, but also just, you know, we have some work to do to get out there in front of a lot of these things that will.
So,
That's
oh, are you done, Director Crompton? You can continue.
okay, great. Thank you. I really like how IAP2 lays out where we are at as far as what kind of communication we're providing. And in some ways, I feel like it would be interesting to add to that clarity around who we are at that point. You know, we have with us today 2 members of our staff team and our electoral area director, or this is the chair, and here, and I think we do that work really well, but in some ways it would be useful to clarify that to ourselves, because I think it would do something similar to what clarifying where we are at in the communications framework. And I just want to say I really look forward to putting this to work. It's a great document to have in front of us, and you've presented it well, but I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a tool to use as we go out into the public, and that's really exciting. One of the things that I'd like to see happen is a regular communication that members of the board are happy to be contacted by members of the public. We put our phone numbers on our website at the beginning of this term, and I don't know how many people take us up on it, but we are able to say at a regular basis, you know, every member of council's phone numbers on the website, and they'd love to talk to you about issues that matter to you, because I certainly would love to hear from people in the Bridge or anywhere around the region about what matters to them. So well done on this. Grateful for your work.
Thank you. My own comments. I'm next on the speakers list. Unless Armin, did you want to comment to something that was just said, or is it a new comment?
No, just briefly, when the discussion was around the who is we, I think it's really interesting to point, because if we as the SLRD staff are developing a plan that would be presented to the board to be voted on, you know, that piece, I suppose we're kind of both halves of that, but there is at some point there's any number of reasons why the board might change the recommendation, accept or change or modify the recommendation that the staff have done. So sort of parsing that out as to what the steps are, I think is really could be quite critical to that understanding point, which I was making at my initial comments. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Jack's question. It is a very good question about who we are. I was at a meeting with a community group a couple of weeks ago, and they are mad as hell at the SLRD, and the SLRD, that SLRD is something else. And I said, well, hang on a minute, you know, that's me. And they went, no, we're not talking about you.
And who?
And then who? Yeah, okay. So, and that had to be sorted out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valuable feedback, and we've had this conversation a number of times over the last several months when emergencies and how we engage during emergencies. And I think that almost has its own bucket of tools that need to be understood so that the expectation is reasonable. It is not reasonable to expect that the fire chief will, you know, come into your home and put the fire out on your stove kind of thing. Like, that's not reasonable. But then there are reasonable expectations of, we will let you know when there's an evacuation alert. And what our expectation is when that alert comes out, because I don't think that's well understood. I think there's sort of this general expectation of what these alerts and orders mean. And I think we can do a good job. I think we can do a better job of sharing that information before the emergency happens, so that the work has already, the foundation has already been laid. The other piece that I wanted to touch on was the costs, and we've sort of talked about this, but what is the cost of a public hearing? Why does it cost what it costs? Why are there value, why is there a value to having a public hearing that is only on Zoom? Because everyone can, attend, whether they're in the area or they're away on holidays, or, how I feel about people attending things when they're on holidays, but for people who want to engage in a public hearing, if there is a Zoom option, and then what does that cost? And then what does it cost? What's the negative cost to having a public hearing that's only on Zoom? People don't engage in the same way. They don't get the same meaning out of what's being said. What does a town hall cost, and why is it valuable? And I think you've covered a lot of this in the framework, but I think that we as board members, explaining the we can explain that in a one-on-one situation when someone asks, well, why wasn't I engaged on this issue? Well, because to engage in a referendum type engagement costs this, what does an election cost? Because I think if we had sort of a snapshot of those costs, it would be valuable for the community to understand that we don't take that lightly. So it's and then to the earlier points made about public hearings and board attendance at public hearings, whether it's in an area or it's if it's a public hearing on an OCP, I think that has one type of audience, and then if it's a public hearing on a specific property, that has a different audience, and how we get that feedback that's incorporated then into the readings and into the bylaw considerations. Those are important things for us to understand. And I think that, as we're going through approving a public hearing to be scheduled, we can explain that differently than just saying, we make a motion to schedule a public hearing and then we don't really talk about it again. Like, and considering some of the things we did yesterday, we can explain why we're doing the public hearing and what the outcome of that public hearing could be. And we see this in municipalities where people are much more connected to a public hearing and can come fairly easily, in my opinion. If you really care about an issue, you'll show up for that public hearing. And if you really don't care, then you're really not voting. It doesn't matter how far away it is. So I just think that's important. And we're not unique. I mean, regional districts have engagement. I think that we are farther ahead than a lot of regional districts in our communication and engagement strategy, because we've got an absolutely professional team doing this work. So thank you. I think you're a pro at what you do. So thank you. And I will now go to CAO Gilmore.
Thank you.
His comments.
I do just have a few comments. I think this was great to get this feedback. I think it just helped build a more robust framework to put forward. Similar to when putting forward any policy framework bylaw, obviously we need to start implementing it, and likely there could be some changes or, oh, we could do this better. So I think to keep that in mind as we work forward into implementing this, I think that's just good to have at the back of our mind. Some comments about things happen. Say, for example, we apply for a grant, it takes 2 years to get that information. Then we start going out to, getting the project underway, and people are going, why do we need a grant for something else? Why are we doing this? So I think the newsletters and sort of that what's happening at the board table and getting that information out early sort of will help point back once we are implementing this and have that whole sort of communication or engagement piece as we move forward will also help us to point back and go, oh, if you recall, if you could look at this page, you know, I think the bang the table pages where there are those project deliveries and timetables and pieces will also help both from the staff and board members to be able to say to the public, well, we have been actively engaging on this. I think emergency preparedness, I think that's good. There's emergency preparedness week. Maybe that's an opportunity for us to go, hey, did you know that, you know, before a wildfire or whatever happens, these are your responsibilities, these are our responsibilities, and start getting prepared and active. So maybe it's something we could do during that time to just say, hey, little reminder, and just do it on an annual basis, right? It's good to keep it fresh. And then for the budget, I think that's a good point. As we bring forward budgets for projects, there could be a conversation at the board table on where, say it's a really large cost to the engagement piece. Maybe that's where that discussion could happen to where exactly it's going to be funded. And then as we move forward, that allocation can be made just because maybe some will be more costly than others. I think that one thing I wanted to wrap up, I was going to maybe save some of these comments, which I may bring up again, just with the Lillooet landfill engagement. There were just, you know, there's been some comments about not providing costs, but we did include costs in the, if you choose this option, here's the low range and here's the higher range. And so those pieces were actually included in this. There were also comment sections at the end. I know that's anyway, we'll get into this more sort of in the regular meeting, but I just wanted to just respond to some of the comments that we've heard. And I think the one other problem is that legislation also tells us how we have to move ahead with the project. And in order to keep it, I don't think anyone here is trying to not listen or have anyone have a voice when we're making a large decision, but sometimes in the interest of moving the project forward, there are just the mechanisms in place, which unfortunately is the 2/3, which sometimes doesn't include that third group. And I think what we would definitely strive to is to get 3 out of 3, like 100% buy-in. You know, I think if there's something maybe we can do to help to, you know, show Lillooet Council that it's not that we're not looking for their opinion and they're not valued. It's just part of the process. I think that's some key messaging that I think it would be great for us to share or help out with that at some point moving forward. Yeah, I just keep my comments there.
Thank you. Okay.
I got one more thing.
You'll just have one more thing.
Okay. I'll come back to that. This is how important I think this is.
Yeah.
I could use Black Tusk Village as an example again. And most of you know that a few years ago, they got a $4.2 million grant and they turned it down. I think if we, at the beginning of that process, had followed this plan and involved their public, involved other directors in that all the way through, I don't think that would have been rejected. We were sort of stumbling around. I was stumbling around, you know, and we ended up the way we did. But I think this would have made all the difference.
So here we are moving forward.
Yes, we are. I think just fantastic.
Go ahead.
Can I just respond to Nikki's comments?
Can we save it for the?
We
open
could,
meeting?
we could.
Because I
yes.
think that might be more appropriate.
Okay.
All right, unless there are any other issues or comments, closing comments from our communications.
Thanks everyone for your feedback. It's really great feedback, and these are meant to be living documents that will evolve as we work through this. And we certainly don't want it to sit on a shelf and not be used, so it needs to be effective. And you provided great feedback. I will say that I really appreciate the kind words. It's definitely been developed in a spirit of collaboration in doing some of the research. There are some municipalities and regional districts that have done some really great work in this space. So they've been very supportive in sharing what they've done, and really been a huge resource for us. So just wanted to mention that we're very grateful for that.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will Move receipt. Director Stoner, seconded by Director Pettengill. Further comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Where did my agenda go? Thank you. Okay, so 5.1 Chair's verbal update. I will, I don't have anything for today. Is there any late business? No. Okay, and can I have someone move adjournment of this meeting? Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Stoner. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.